Good evening. I'll start off by just saying that I apologize. Our normal, regular priests weren't available for this Mass. So we had to bring a priest out of high school to come and do the Mass. But don't worry, there's a very good chance that it will be a valid Mass. So, welcome back, buddy. When Jesus was asked which was the greatest commandment, he answered as a good Jew is supposed to answer, with to love God and to love our neighbor. This was not a new concept, but could be traced back to early Hebrew scriptures. Ironically, the person asking the question was not really behaving in accordance with that commandment because he was testing Jesus and trying to get him to trip up and make a mistake. Not a very loving way to act toward your neighbor. In answering the question, Jesus put a new spin on this commandment because he said, the second commandment is like the first. First, you love God, and without loving God, you couldn't possibly love your neighbor. We are made in the image and likeness of God, and that's exactly what makes us lovable. If we truly love God, it's impossible not to love mankind. Today, we hear a question meant to trap, a short and simple answer, and a challenge issued to all of us who are Catholic. The second part of Jesus' answer, the part which says we ought to love our neighbor, is taken from the book of Leviticus, chapter 19, which gives a series of commands against injustice and oppression. For Jesus to say that the second is like the first is to raise the idea of love for each other to a whole new level. It means that to believe in God mandates that we be committed to and be involved with each other. Jesus' response inseparably links love of God and love of neighbor. And he modeled that for us when he lived his life on earth. His whole life was lived for others, and if we are to model ourselves on him, we too must be involved with those in the world, especially those in need. We cannot be content to live our whole life in the safe environment of our family or our parish, but rather we must take the message of Christ out into the world for all who know us to hear it loudly and clearly. In our country today, we have roughly 78 million Catholics who are baptized. And in spite of these numbers, we've let our country pretty much fall apart and become so anti-Catholic and immoral. As Catholics, we profess a belief in Jesus Christ and in his teachings, but many of us suffer from a very deadly disease called complacency. Complacency is that ailment which causes us to keep quiet and do nothing and wait for the next guy to make a difference. And when that guy does, we go, yeah, me too. Another malady we've contracted is chronic courtesy. That causes us to ignore injustices which are going on around us, even though we know it's wrong, because we don't want to force our beliefs on others. Painfully politically correct. We all know that killing someone is wrong. We are all very disturbed when we hear of the senseless murders on TV, mass shootings, and the acts of twisted aggression by terrorist groups like Hamas or Hezbollah or any other terrorist group. Yet complacency causes us to be silent when our laws tell us that a woman may make a choice to end the life of her baby if she decides, for whatever reason, that now she doesn't want to be a mother. The reality is that once she is pregnant, she already is a mother. We know abortion is wrong and unnatural, and we say we would never do that. Never, ever. But too often we think it's more wrong to force our beliefs on others with different opinions. Using the same logic, shouldn't it be okay to rob a bank? If somebody thinks it's okay to rob a bank, we know it's wrong, but we should never force our belief on someone else. This kind of logic makes that sound pretty ridiculous, doesn't it? It just doesn't hold up. So, how do we apply the commandment given to us by Jesus to love our neighbor as ourselves? We must begin by loving and standing up for even the tiniest of neighbors, the unborn child. Since 1973, about 60 million babies have been aborted in our country. We can no longer be complacent about that. October has been set aside by the Church for many years now as Respect Life Month. I wonder how many of those 78 million baptized Catholics even know that. Another life issue which seems to stand out when we think of Jesus' commandment to love is the issue of death with dignity. The dying process of someone we love, or ultimately the own dying process we all will go through, is never pleasant. It's never a good experience. We're being duped into believing that death with dignity can only be attained by opting to take one's own life in order to avoid pain and suffering. Right now, physician-assisted suicide is legal in our country in Oregon, Montana, Vermont, Washington State, California, Colorado, Hawaii, New Jersey, Maine, Washington, D.C., and New Mexico. But we know the real death with dignity is death assisted by faith and trust in Almighty God. Hospice and palliative care is available to help those who are terminally ill to manage their pain so that their final time with us need not be a time of agony and despair, but rather a time of comfort, dignity, and hope. As Catholics, we must make sure that society does not continue to lead us down the road we are on. It's time for us to make our culture a culture of life rather than a culture of death. There are so many examples of how we've been overwhelmed with what's going on around us. Sometimes we can feel like there's nothing we can do about it to make a difference. However, there is. Soon we will be exercising our right as citizens to vote in elections coming up. It's very important that we vote, and even more important, that we live the commandment of love and vote with an informed Catholic conscience. Do you know where our candidates stand on the issues that are important to us as Catholics? Do you know who is pro-life and who is pro-death? It is our Catholicism that should influence our vote and not our bank account. Even when local candidates come and knock on the door, I think I drive them crazy because when they do that, I ask them questions. They give us the pamphlet, and I ask them, where do you stand on abortion? And I always get the answer, well, it's just a local election. I'm just running for a town council or something like that. But let us remember what our 5 non-negotiable issues are as Catholics. They are abortion, euthanasia, embryonic stem cell research, human cloning, and same-sex marriage. Don't think it's not important because it's only a local election. Remember that that's where big political careers begin. I pray that the teachings of Christ will make a difference in our lives and that together we may make our love for one another change the country and change the world.